I have a love-hate relationship with the test.
Yeah.
Like I think most Enneagram coaches do. I actually do tend to tell people to start with a test, but with a huge disclosure of not just taking the test answer as the definitive type that you are. Because unfortunately the tests are, about, we all say different things, but I usually say about 70% accurate at best. And so, that means out of 10 people, 3 of them are mistyped from a test every single time. So I tell them to take the test, but look at the top 3 to 5 results. Don't just go for that number 1 slot. Go for 3 to 5. 5 if like all your results are like 60% and it's just very vague. 3 if it's like 98%, 80%, and 80%. So take those 3 types and then go and look at those types' core motivations and really dig in and ask yourself, why do I like a clean house? Why do I like there to be control in situations? Why do I like to go on adventures? And just probably you'll need to ask why again. Like, I like a clean house because it's nice. And people should see, I have to go beyond that. I can't go just say, well, it's a nice thing to have. I need to keep asking, well, why is it a nice thing to have? Why do I need to have order? Why do I want people to see a clean house? And so it's going to
Yeah.
take you a few more whys before you actually get down to your core motivation.
And are there any common like test taking mistakes that you hear about or see?
The most common one would probably be people take the test and answer based on what they think they should do or what
Mm,
they think society would expect them to do, right? This is going to be, you want to do the test based on, call it, if the world didn't exist, what would be your ideal way of answering this test, right? Like nobody's going to judge you if you want to spend all your time at your house, or, you got to ignore the fact that we do change our traits a little bit in behavior because of society or how they expect us to be. But the test, we want to find out how you would like to be if the society didn't matter. It does, but
yes.
if it didn't.
Right, 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 right. Um, I'm curious too, like what some of your recommended tests or assessments are, because and even I recently took the Enneagram Institute one again, just because it had been a while, and I'm like, people are asking a lot of questions, and so let me just go through this again. And I even struggled sometimes because I'm like, oh, am I this type or this type, or I was this way, and I get all of that. So I get the struggle. What do you recommend, or what are some of the tests or assessments that you recommend people start with?
I often recommend Truities. Um, they are usually a pretty good one to take. My favorite is actually your Enneagram coaches, but I usually have to throw out the disclosure that the test itself isn't Christian, but they kind of Christianize the results.
Okay.
Which, if you're just going for an answer, it doesn't really matter. You can ignore all the Christianese. But I like it because they run you through all the questions, and then, on the back end, they take your top 2 highest scores and they kind of give you these 3 death match questions between those 2 types at the very end. And so they're like, okay, well, she scored highest in 6 and 1, but now let's pair those questions and make her try and choose between 6 and 1 over and over again. So I kind of like that because it kind of tries to weed out. It's not just one type instantly. They're like, well, these are 2 very high options. Let's see. It's still just as prone to being flawed as all the other tests, but I find it helps a little bit.
I love that. Yeah, that's something I don't think that I have seen in many of the other assessments. So that's a great
Yeah.
option too. And maybe take a few, especially with the free ones. You might as well kind of dig into it a little bit.
Usually I kind of like to play call it desert island with the Enneagram motives. And so it's like, would you rather be, if we're going to pair 1 and 6, I'd say, would you rather be right, but not secure? Or would you rather be secure, but maybe not like perfectly right? Because I feel like everybody kind of wants to be right. Everybody wants to be secure, but like those top ideals, if you only could have one, which would be a crazy rule. But if you could only have one, which one would you choose? And so for me, I love being secure, but I want to stand with what I think is right beyond security, even though I really want to be secure too.
Okay. Okay. What do you say to that question?
Yeah, you're right. That is a question I get a lot. I think all coaches probably get it a lot. So your type can't change. It's usually set really young in life, and you're kind of just stuck with it. Ideally stuck with growing it into the healthier version of your type, but you are stuck with your type. But I do add that people feel like their types will change. And sometimes that's based on taking a test when you're stressed, and then you take it when you're healthy, and the test is like, well, now you're a different number, but it's really, now you're just healthy. You're out of the stress season. And so your traits look different, which tests are mainly based on traits, which is why they're inaccurate. For some reason, we have yet to decide how to make a core motivation test, but someday we'll get there. So taking a test and getting different results just because it's based on your traits is a common reason that people think they're suddenly a different type. As I alluded to, being in stress and not being in stress, or vice versa, is another reason people feel like they mistyped. Because, if I was really, really stressed, I might look like a 4, but if I come out of that season, then I'm going to look like a 1. And if I don't check in on that core motivation, I could totally think my type changed, even though it actually has always stayed 1. It's just the traits or behaviors kind of flow into a different type when you're really, really stressed. And then let's see, the other one I usually point people to is trauma. So we all experience trauma, but typically like the capital T traumas, the really big things that are going to mess you up. Those ones can definitely cause people to either go to their stress number and take on some of those traits, or it can also sometimes, just as a coping mechanism, you'll take on the traits of a different type that might not even be connected to you to try and protect yourself. So like type 6, type 8, I see a lot because type 6s are very worst case scenario, protect themselves from all the bad things, which of course you would do after trauma. Type 8 is, building such a strong defense so that they can't get hurt ever again. There's, you can take on any of the traits, but those are some very common ones. And so you don't have to be connected to those types to try and protect yourself. When you need to protect yourself, you're going to use whatever traits you need to. But if you're using them so much because you've been through trauma, you can start looking like that type, even though somewhere deep down the bottom is actually your core motivation from your actual type. It's being buried right now because you need to build up so many shields and barriers right now.
I'm so glad you said that. There made me think of a conversation that I had a few weeks ago with Jessica Denise Dixon. Are you familiar with her?
Mm-hmm.
We had a conversation around what does race have to do with the Enneagram? And she was kind of saying similar things like your past, culture, race, obviously gender, like all of these things kind of play into how it's presented. And going back to the point that you made is why you really have to be careful with not just the test, but the description, because there's usually just a stereotypical description that you may or may not identify with. And so taking into all of that into consideration. What are some of those benefits of knowing not just your type, but someone else's type? How can it help that relationship?
Knowing somebody else's type, one of the biggest things I like to point out is it's going to help you not trigger their wounding message or their core fear or dismissing their core desire, right? Like if my husband didn't realize that mistakes are actually a huge deal to me, mistakes are so much bigger to me than any other type. And so if he was just dismissing, like, it's fine, like, it's just a mistake, get over it, that would be so wounding and hurtful to me as a 1. And so like he knows, certain words might trigger me, certain, things like that. Him even just realizing that I like things to be orderly and right. And thankfully he's a pretty orderly and clean guy too. But And so we can like cater towards some of it. And I'm not saying cater to an unhealthy level. If you have, my husband's a 5. I know he needs recharge time. I know that my husband is a 5, needs recharge time. But if I cater to it to the extreme where I'm letting him stay in his room for 23 hours a day, then that's not loving either anymore. And so there is a balance of catering towards other people. And then, hopefully they are catering back to you of what you need so that you're both trying to understand that their core fear is just as scary as your core fear, even though you might not get it at all. And it's not a big deal to you. It's just as hurtful or harmful to them as yours is.
That's so good. Something else you just said was, it made me think of like the growth and how growth looks different and how like supporting somebody, to have alone time could be very helpful. And then for others, it's like, okay, that's not supportive anymore. And just like knowing, what looks like growth for an 8 might look the opposite for a 2 or vice versa or whatever. So
Very much.
understanding that too. Yeah.